Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, Dr. Martin, and Mr. James Junkin. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. Guess who's back? Back again. Bama's back. Tell a friend. Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Roll Tide, baby. It's football season. Do not be on Saturday.
By the time this episode plays, it's going to be almost time for the first Bama football game of the season. What'd you tell us on the last episode? That it's going to be the first Saturday of September?
In September, we'll be getting after it. So good luck to everyone that's out there. You know what I love about football? It brings us all together. Everybody likes to go watch a football game. We're not all fans, but it gives me something to do other than focus on work all the time and just grind. And I think that's probably true of a lot of people, man. There's nothing like being in a stadium of 102,000 people. You're all cheering. Yeah, go Bama. It's awesome, man. So
is it always everybody 102,000 all cheering for Bama?
Yeah.
No LSU fans or no?
Well, that's what our stadium holds. We don't get that when we're in Baton Rouge. But
okay, I got it. So why don't we get started with the rip from the headlines for today, James?
Listen, our rip from the headlines is going to be the topic of this particular podcast session. So a lot of conversations being going on this past week out of a major verdict out of Houston, down in Harris County, going back to an incident that has really been talked about a lot in the safety and legal circles, which is the Watson grinding explosion back in 2020. Many of our listeners that keep up with the Chemical Safety Board probably have read about that incident. They at least have seen some LinkedIn posts about that incident. The Chemical Safety Board came out with the results of their investigation, and we're going to walk through that incident because this is what happens when things get beyond your fence line. We injured workers, we killed people in the community, we burned down people's houses and their businesses. And last week, the jury got to speak. We're going to talk about it.
The jury wasn't happy.
And the jury was not happy.
So tell us about this incident for those of us that didn't read about it on the CSB. And 2020 was COVID, right? It was during the COVID era?
It was. So Watson Grinding and Manufacturing, what they did was they operated a facility in Houston that used propylene, which is part of a thermal spray coating processes. And they have a lot of different applications for that, including the Defense Department, NASA, some other commercial applications, aircraft thing. Well, during the evening of January the 23rd, 2020, a hose assembly disconnected, and the propylene began leaking into the coating building. And the leak continued all through the night. People went home and it kept going. Early in the morning, explosive concentrations, as you can imagine, accumulated inside that building. And what's particularly troubling is there were warning signs that this could happen. Employees got there at the facility. First thing they did was they smelled it, right? And they're like, this has got to be a significant gas leak. They heard hissing. They smelled the gas. They communicated their concerns to management. And yet, the facility was not evacuated. Emergency responders were not contacted. Workers remained on site. And eventually, they think this is what happened. An employee went into the building and an ignition source was activated and the gas ignited, and then there was an explosion and people died. Folks in the community were impacted. Homes were destroyed. Businesses were destroyed. You had the Chemical Safety Board investigation. You had the OSHA investigation. Fast forward till the courtroom of last week. Litigation expanded beyond just Watson Grinding and went to focus on one of their contractors, 3M, through its ownership of DECCOM, which is a company that was involved in the inspection and servicing of the gas detection system that evidently was not working properly. Came back with $61.5 million verdict against the defendants in this case, of which 30% went to the contractor.
So let's just jump back here a little bit, because I want to make sure people are not confused about what we're going to talk about today, because a jury verdict James and I like to talk a lot about OSHA, right? A lot of our episodes have been about OSHA, impacts to workers, things of that nature. But when we start talking jury verdict, we're talking about liability, negligence, gross negligence. What else, James?
All sorts of different type of torts where you've injured some other party in civil litigation. When you're talking about worker injuries, typically you're talking about those things, gross negligence, right? Wrongful death, but you can also have breach of contract. You can have other claims like loss of consortium, pain and suffering, depending on who you injured and how you injured them.
Yeah.
In this particular case, this went beyond the employees. Normally, you and I are talking about the legal aspects of occupational safety and health as it deals to workers. Well, once it gets beyond your fence line, you're dealing with the community.
There are legal aspects for all those other parties as well, right?
Absolutely.
And, this is the other part of what James and I do for a living, both for the plaintiff and defense, probably more so me, a balance, and James does more defense work than I do. But we talk about all the things that lead up to this, right? And there's a bunch of things that go into how did they arrive at this verdict?
Well, I think probably one of the biggest things from this takeaway is Exhibit A is the report from the Chemical Safety Board. The Chemical Safety Board did not come down to say this is an incident primarily about a hose being left on at night. It's bigger than that. They got into mechanical integrity issues, management of change issues, emergency preparedness failures, deficiencies in process safety information. There were
Emails,
critical
text
safeguards.
messages.
And then there were these documentation issues related to what did you know and when did you know it?
That's right.
Right? So, let's talk about, from your perspective, kind of going back and looking at this, these major instances, these conditions that set this, they don't just happen, right? It's not just that day. From the cases you've investigated, short-term or long-term, systemic, if you will, problems to lead up to that. Has that been your experience?
Yeah. So, when we start talking about going to court, right? We talk about all the things that come with reconstructing what happened, right? And not just the incident itself, because, the Chemical Safety Board probably looked at some prior stuff as well. I mean, I haven't read this as deeply as you have, but they look at everything leading up to the incident and the aftermath, right? And so they probably had quite a bit of information just with that Exhibit A, right? Because they're looking at, was this kind of a freak thing, or who knew? When did they know? And what were the communications that were going on in the background, right? This is called reconstruction, right? Basically,
Right.
And it's something that you and I do. I would say almost on it every day now. I think we both built our practices a little bit that we're looking at the totality because people are getting sued, and
And when you get sued, that kind of brings us up to what I wanted to talk about in conjunction with this incident, is you have a new book out that talks about this, and I love the title, The Record Decides, because that is exactly what happened in this case.
Yeah.
The record decided, well, I guess you could go on and say, if you want to say, the record's what the jury used to decide on their $61.5 million verdict that they got to render.
Yeah. So,
Right.
so as you mentioned, I have a new book of which you wrote the foreword, by the way. So thank you, James, for writing the foreword to this book. But the Record Decides is about the fact that, there's really not, when you go into these litigation situations, right? The record is the record, right? And we can advocate one side or the other, but that's not really what the Chemical Safety Board is supposed to be doing. They're not advocating for the employer. They're not advocating for the workers. They're just finding the facts, right? And when everything shakes out, when the record is all laid out in front of you without embellishing or taking a side or, cherry picking what you want, the record will tell you who did the wrong here, right? Who was there something that qualifies for one of these conditions for which they awarded money.
Well, we follow a similar process in civil litigation as a subject matter expert or an expert witness or someone who's advising counsel on this, as you might do in a investigation for a safety investigation. You're interviewing personnel, you're collecting statements. That might be a deposition. It might be a written statement that you have. It might be request for production or interrogatories. It's just different legal words for the same thing, right? We're going back to talk to people, to get their memories, to get their statements. But look, witness testimony, as you know, and I know, this is that happened in 2020. The case just got decided in 2023. One of the takeaways from your book that I found most powerful is memories are imperfect, but the documentation and records are not.
That's right.
The
That's right.
The written record is the most objective source of information that we have because it was made contemporaneous to the incident.
Yeah. And James, I just did a LinkedIn article about kind of a subject that was very close to this, right? And it was about incident investigation and how a lot of times we insert all these different things into what we're writing, right? It was clear that blah, 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 blah. It is decidedly so that, this happened and so that happened. And, when that goes into an investigation or it goes into any of your documents, right, you should consider that that's going to be read out loud at some point in a trial like this, right?
Well,
and so if you can't prove it or it isn't a fact, probably shouldn't go in writing.
the crux of the case, and I haven't read the transcripts. I've seen some summaries of what went on in this recent case down in Houston. But the crux of the matter was we had gas detection equipment. We knew it wasn't working. It hadn't been working for some time. We didn't fix it. There was plenty of written documentation, text messages, things of that nature. You were alerted on the day of the event that we smelled gas. We didn't do anything. So to bring it back around, I had somebody ask me yesterday, he said, how important is it for me as a safety professional to understand some of these legal aspects of occupational safety and health? And I said, it's 100% critical. You don't have to know all the terminology, but you need to know this. If you're listening to me, you need to ask this question. Do you have significant hazards within your organization that have been identified but remain unresolved? Because you'll notice now, significant hazards that you know about that you've either put in past incident investigations, job hazard analysis, emails, text messages, whatever. We as a management team, as supervision, we know we have these hazards, but they remain unresolved. And I see this all the time, especially when it comes to hazards created by training. Well, let's just get people out there and get them in this confined space. We'll do the training a little bit later. We'll do the training when we hire more people. We'll get this done when we have the budget for it. We're continuing to take that risk. Now think about that a moment. Because that's where catastrophic incidences often originate. It builds over time.
That's right. And, to go a little farther, James, we talked about bringing on a colleague of yours, this Tom O'Connor, who does discovery, specifically electronic discovery, right? And,
Right.
If you think somebody's not going to know, first of all, that you identified a hazard that you didn't control, right? That's probably not going to happen, right? If you identified it, they're going to know that. But they're also going to know everything else too. The text message you sent, the email you sent, the communications between parties. Again, one of the least accurate things that you can rely upon are witness statements or people's recollection, because many times, what I've seen in depositions that go back and forth is that everybody's trying to put themselves in a good light as best they can, right? So that they don't incriminate themselves, but they don't quite lie, but they're just trying to skirt that line. But when it comes right down to it, if it's in writing, if you've been put on notice, all those things, they come out. And when you lay them out on the table and you put all the pieces together, it says what it says. And there's no denying it.
And, you know, in safety, we generate a lot of reports, a lot of documentation. We generate it through JHAs. We generate it through hazard assessments, facility assessments, right? And once that report generates, the trail then sort of disappears. There's no assignment. There's no accountability. There's no closure verification. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago on our 150th episode about stop work authority. It only exists in the form of a paper document. Nobody's really tracking why a person stopped the job, what the issue was, did we close it, who had the authority to close it, any of that, no follow-up. And then years later, the attorneys and the experts, they get the record, they get the files. Right?
They pull out page 14 and they say, what does it say here on page 14? And on page 14, you say, read this line right here, Mr. Junkin.
I mean, that becomes the document that we once thought was showing that we are demonstrating due diligence and exercising reasonable care. All of a sudden now that becomes the evidence that the organization knew about the hazard.
That's right. That's right.
So when I talk to CEOs, I get this all the time. Like, how do I sell safety? How do I get attention to my CEO? How do I get them to buy in? This is how you do it. $61.5 million verdict, 3 people dead. One company's out of business, and the contractor is going to spend 30% of that verdict, right? Why? Because it's clear. The record's clear. So we're generating these hazard assessments. We're generating these site safety assessments. We're going through audits. You know, we do a bunch of audits for people. We create these corrective actions. That becomes part of the record. That stuff is discoverable.
There's all kinds of places where I go and do inspections. And one of the things I always say is, these are great. These inspections are great. I'm giving you good information, but you must close the action items. You must close them, right? There must be a response somewhere in your system to how this was closed out and what you did to abate the hazard, because those all become discoverable, right?
So absolutely. You have a statement. I quoted this or cited this in my article that's there on LinkedIn about this incident that was posted today. That article is from Catastrophe to Courtroom, the Watson grinding explosion and the expanding liability of hiring clients, right? But I cited your book in this, and there's a statement from your book that really resonated with me. You essentially are arguing that safety documents are written twice. Once when the professional creates them, and again years later when an attorney reads them aloud in court. Expand on that. What's your thoughts were on that?
I'm going to pose the question to you, right? And I've thought about this a lot. What's better, to have something in writing that you didn't do, or not put it in writing at all? There's an evil in both, right? Because you should do it.
There's a known or reasonably should have known, right? There is a theory in the law. I've heard certain attorneys espouse this, especially those that are hiring clients, that I don't want to know anything. I don't want to hear anything. We don't want to see anything. We hired a contractor. All we want to see is their invoice. And that does not absolve you from liability. Brett Ketterkamp and I wrote an article about that. The fallibility of indemnification and hold harmless clauses to protect you from contractor worker injury claims, right? But there are some people that believe that. That's a good question. Should I just put my head in the sand? I don't think it protects you. But once you do know, because there's reasonably should have known, you have a responsibility to exercise reasonable due care. And if you're an employer, you have a responsibility. If you're an employer, you have a responsibility to protect your workers from hazards that are likely to cause serious injury or death. That's black letter law right there. You have a duty to the community. So you're going to be held accountable for it anyway. But once you have the documentation, once you officially know, once you've got an email they read to the jury, they hear your response or your non-response, right?
That's right.
It becomes a deposition of
Yeah.
what you thought.
Let me answer your question. Your question was, you write it twice. Once for the company, right? And what you're doing, and once for the jury. And I guess, I've been schooled recently by somebody I work with all the time who reads my stuff really carefully and gives me a lot of feedback. I was going to say a different word, but gives me a lot of feedback on my work. And he says this a lot, right? It's really great to have a world class safety program. You see all these people on LinkedIn. I want world class. I want top of the line. I want to do more. I want to do more, right? But more is only better if you're going to do it all, right? So
Right.
all these, like, safety is our number one priority. Safety first. We believe everybody should go home from the job the same way that they come in. All these great safety slogans that everybody likes to write into their program, they sound great until you're reading it in court, and they've got all these things backed up to ask you about after you read that sentence from your safety program, right? Your world-class safety program that goes beyond what OSHA requires, that goes beyond all these things, because it sounded great and you really meant to do it. You really did mean to do it, but then you didn't.
So from your book, every report, every inspection, every audit, every recommendation, every email, every maintenance record, every deficiency notice, every one of those documents may eventually have an audience the writer never anticipated.
That's right. And I'm dealing with the case right now that I can't really talk about, but I'm seeing emails come out and it's clear. Nobody ever intended anybody else to see them, but here they are.
I had a case back in 2 years ago. It was a serious injury case. Worker flipped over a piece of equipment and was seriously injured. But there were some questions about the extent of his injury and whether or not the actions of the company amounted to gross negligence. And I worked for the defendant in this case. And I was the opinion then, I'm opinion now. It did not amount to gross negligence. But to arrive at that point, we need to go back and look at everything. So let me give you what I look for when I do this type of work, and you tell me if you look for anything different. So when they ask me to do expert witness type work or render an opinion letter, there's usually 5 categories I like to look at. Number 1, give me your hazard assessments. Give me your audit reports. Give me your maintenance records. Give me your corrective action logs from your incident investigations, right, in past. What did you identify? What did you correct in your hazard audits that you were out there? What was wrong? How'd you correct it? And then I need your organizational communications. And you'd be shocked what people put in writing, especially text messages. And what I'm trying to determine is, did the hazard suddenly appear? Or is this something where warning signs have existed beforehand? So what do you ask for when they're asking you to render an opinion?
So I'm looking for all those same kind of things, James, but I'm expanding as far out as I can possibly think. You're following the snail trail, from text message to acquaintance to passerby, when I create lists for people, for attorneys, when they're doing discovery, because I'm sure you do the same thing, I'm looking for any possible, we mentioned this on another podcast right before this, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon, 7 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. I'm not just looking for things within the company. I'm looking for things said to family members, to, everything. We're asking for absolutely everything, because there may be nothing, but almost always you will find that somebody put something in writing somewhere that definitively tells you what was going on.
And I think the other thing this case does is you're seeing the expansion of liability beyond the owner of the facility. Okay. So in this case, you had an owner that operated a facility that hired a contractor to come in, install, and maintain an alarm system. The employer in this case, they have the first level of liability.
But not the only.
But not the only one. Okay? Not the only one. And this case shows that, at least in the eyes of the jury, that landscape of the owner's responsible for everything is changing a little bit. It's the owner plus, right?
Mhm.
So it's been my experience that attorneys don't just simply ask who owned the facility and let's
Yeah.
just sue them. I had a case last year where a guy got crushed in a pump jack situation. They were working on this pump jack. They had the weight up. They had the brake engaged. The brake failed for some reason. The weight came down and crushed this guy between them. He lived for about 30 seconds. He was able to speak just a little bit. He was crushed, killed. And the question wasn't who did he work for? The question was, who built this thing? Who designed it? Who maintained it? Who inspected it? There's the inspection sticker on the side of it. Who calibrated it? Who recommended repairs?
Right.
Are there any documented deficiencies to that? So it's not just the contractor that hired this person to go out and do that job. If you're associated with it, you can get dragged into other people's problems. In other words, involvement creates exposure.
Yeah.
And a hazard plus exposure equals risk.
So let's put this into context where people will understand, right? Because we talk a lot about instant investigation and how we don't want to just pick one cause, right? There's the one root cause. This is what did it. The employee did it. The machine did it. Whatever. That's the thing. That's the thing. And it's never one thing, right? It's, in my experience, incidents, accidents, fatalities, etc. It's never one thing. It's this goes back to your final garnish, right? There are a lot of things that you put in the soup before the soup gets made, before we eat the soup, right? And before it tastes just right, and something happens. And so, just like we do with the discovery request, and I'm sure you do this too, we look for every possible person in the kitchen.
Yeah.
And a good plaintiff's lawyer, and in this case, it looks like this person probably had a good plaintiff's lawyer, will look for every possible person in the chain. And even then, they might even name a John Doe as a placeholder, right? If they can't find somebody. And so, you should consider, you should consider that everybody's looking for all the degrees of separation, because somebody or several somebodies, as in this case, they're going to share the liability and they're going to share the costs of paying out this verdict.
And I want to shift this just a little bit, because this is where people come at me and say, we have a contract. And contracts matter. Absolutely. But hear my words. Contracts cannot overcome poor work quality, inadequate documentation, or failure to meet your professional obligations.
Mm-hmm.
If you knew and your actions, either knowledge or actions, contributed to a situation that caused an explosion that wiped out a neighborhood, you're going to be paying part of that $61+ million verdict.
Well, a good contracts attorney will tell you that same thing, that you can't really contract away liability. Everybody tries to do this in the construction field, right? They try to contract the liability down the food chain, right? Down the food chain. But as they're contracting down the food chain, they're well aware of the hazards that they're contracting out, right? And that's the catch. That's the catch, is that whole action of doing that creates knowledge. I have knowledge of what I'm contracting away and why, right?
And see,
somebody
I think
sits,
that begins that to me begins when you make contractor selection primarily a procurement only function. Selecting a contractor is fundamentally risk management function, right? The implications of poor contractor selection go way beyond just project performance here. We're talking about catastrophic instances. We're talking about reputational damage. That defendant, in this case, they're done. They're out of business. They're bankrupt. The contractor, in this case, happens to be large enough to absorb it. But what about the reputation? You got business continuity concerns and all these type things. So, again, it kind of brings me back to that question earlier. Do you have hazards where there's exposure, worker exposure, community exposure, people exposure, exposure, right?
Mm-hmm.
That are going unmitigated right now? If you do, you better sit down and really think about that from a risk register standpoint and what that means. Because if it gets beyond your fence line, it's bad enough when it's in your fence. Once it gets beyond your fence line,
you're in a whole lot of world of hurt.
Different thing.
That's right. That's right. Well, that's a good discussion, James. I'm glad we brought that up today. I mean, it kind of is in both of our wheelhouses with a lot of what we do now. I hope it enlightens some people a little bit. I mean, I know we've talked a little bit before about putting stuff in writing and what to say and what not to say, what you know and what you don't know, right? A lot of people like to think that they know something, but the facts are the facts. The facts don't favor that. They don't go in saying, I really like this guy over here that's the plaintiff, or I really like this guy over here that's the defendant. The facts are the facts.
Facts are the facts.
And in the end result, the facts.
I think that's a lesson for the procurement people. Todd Conklin does his thing pre-accident investigation. How about pre-accident procurement contractor selection? Things like the procurement experts should be asking. Can the contractor demonstrate technical expertise? Can they show me that their people are trained? And I'm talking about just safety trained. I'm talking competent and trained to do the job that they've been out here hired to do. Are you tracking deficiencies? Don't just tell me yes in the pre-qual. Show me that you're tracking deficiencies.
And correcting.
How are you handling recommendations? How do you ensure quality? How are critical findings escalated? Like, you come out here to my job site and you find something that I need to know about. How does that get communicated from your team to my team? How are you doing it with your other classes? What lessons have they learned from previous projects? And if you noticed in all those things I just listed, I didn't one time say, give me your EMR, recordable incident rate. Those are useful metrics. But that wouldn't have prevented this from happening.
That's right. That's right. Well, on that note, James, I think this has been another good episode. Thanks for bringing it up. Do you want to tell our listeners how they can get a hold of us?
Yeah, man. Hey, we're there. Out there hanging out on LinkedIn every day. Both of us, you can reach out to us. I get a lot of messages through LinkedIn, through the messaging app. But you can also follow us there and the Risk Matrix podcast on LinkedIn. We got our own LinkedIn page. Subscribe. Hey, if you learned something today that you didn't know before you heard that episode, do me a favor, go over there and hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you find out something today that can improve your practice of safety, that can improve the risk management within your organization, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit down there in that comment. That really helps us out, right? It really helps us out. If you did learn anything today, but you said, you know what, those folks know what they're talking about, and their voice needs to be heard, because I know a lot of people there in procurement and safety and in risk management that need to hear this message, hit that like button, hit subscribe, go down in the comments, give us a shout out. It really helps us. And last thing, your mama wants you to listen to the Risk Matrix, babe.
Darn right.
What's the other reason? Why wouldn't you do that?
So thanks again for listening to the Risk Matrix, and we hope to see you next time. If you really like what we do, we got a lot of episodes in the can, so you can get them on YouTube, Spotify.
A lot of great videos coming up. And hey, I just want to give that shout out one more time, Dr. Martin. I know you're not into self-promotion, but tell them about your book and where they can get your book, please.
So the book is on Amazon. It's called The Record Decides: Safety and Industrial Hygiene Expert Services in Workplace Injury, Occupational Disease, and OSHA Litigation. It's got 29 chapters, and it covers a bunch of different topics. You can go on my LinkedIn. I got a bunch of things about it. And you go on Amazon, Search for The Record Decides or Logan F. Martin, and you can pull that up there and buy it online, or you can buy it through me if you hit me up with a message, and I'll sign it. Thanks
Well, there
again,
you go.
James.
Folks, reach out and get a book, The Record Decides. Until next time, y'all keep bringing those workers home safe from high hazard jobs and roll tide. We're
Roll
out,
Tide.
baby.